Now that I got a little more brightness and you can see me, I'm glad they still make newspapers. This is the Daily News, the war on guns, right? Front page, right? Now check this shit out. I'm so glad I opened this one today. I didn't know this was going on. Hunger strike victim inmate beaten, beaten, beaten in prison. I'll read a little bit of this to you, right? I don't know who this guy is. Look, let me take the front page off. Make it easier for me to read. It's a long story, but it's when I read it, it was totally messed up. Okay. It sounds a lot like what happened to me when I first got to New York. This Bloods and Crips shit. I never was a part of that shit. But I know people who live that life, they subscribe to that life. Alright. You like getting jumped in and jumped out of shit, that's on you. I've never been that type of person. This is why I never joined a fraternity or a sorority. Or yeah, fraternity. Not girl, but it's the guy right here. Right? His lawyer says he was attacked by a gang after transfer, right? There he goes. By Graham Rayman, New York Daily News. This is Thursday, January 27, 2022. Okay? An outspoken Rikers Island inmate on a hunger strike was transferred to a unit filled with gang members who severely beat him after a correction officer labeled him a snitch. A correction officer. A correction officer. Right? Not an inmate. This is a correction officer. Okay? So let me read that sentence again. An outspoken Rikers Island inmate on a hunger strike was transferred to a unit filled with gang members who severely beat him after a correction officer labeled him a snitch. The head of a city public defenders organization wrote in a scathing letter Wednesday to New Jails Commissioner Louis Molina. And why do I keep seeing that name? That's the name of the people that apparently took over my Obamacare, my health insurance, the ACA, Affordable Health Care Act stuff. But okay, that's another story. Ervin Bowins, who helped lead the hunger strike beginning January 7th in the Robert N. Davoren Center, faced a campaign, quote unquote, campaign of retaliation, along with other inmates who joined the protest. Stan German, executive director of New York County Defenders Services, wrote, the strike was in response to poor conditions and lack of basic services in the jails. The Daily News broke a story on the food strike on January 11th, quoting Bowins by name. 2 days later, according to German's letter, the Davoren Center warden's security detail removed Bowins from the jail. He was moved January 13 into the George R. Vierno Center, where he was held in fetid, crowded intake cell, Boyle said. Then Bowins was dumped into a, quote, gang dormitory, unquote, German wrote in the letter. So this guy, January 11th, he started, this food strike, right? And 2 days later, he gets transferred to another facility where he's held in a crowded intake cell. And I've been locked up before, and the 2 times I got locked up, the first time I went in, it was more like 3. But the first time I went in, it was crowded, right? Then the second time I went in, it wasn't crowded at all. They just had me with some white supremacist type dude, right? And the third time it was crowded again. So And this was the same prison, Howard R. Young Correctional Facility, same prison my brother went to. All right. So he starts the hunger strike January 11th because of the poor conditions and lack of basic services in the jails. January 11th. January 13th, he gets moved to another center and dumped into quote unquote gang dormitory. Right. All right. As Bowins, the victim, and the inmate entered the dorm, a correction officer yelled, quote, "Here's your snitch back," end quote, Boyle said. Roughly 10 to 15 detainees then allegedly jumped Bowins, beating him. Quote, "He has a black eye. The whites of his eyes are bloodied, and he has a deep scratch in the middle of his forehead," end quote, Boyle said. The day after the beating, Boyle tried in vain to see Bowins. Boyle is his lawyer. First, he was told Bowins was in a COVID unit and could not be produced. So they denied, him the right to see his client. Then, jail officials said his unit was being searched. Now they're making excuses, right? When Boyle demanded to speak to a supervisor, he says he was told none were available. No surprise there, right? This is what happens when you end up in the system. Like, you're at the whim of whoever is working for the system. Okay. This was yet another lie German wrote. Boyle was met with a systematic effort to block access to our client. That was in quotes. Bowins was transferred once again to the Vernon C. Bain Center, a jail barge anchored in the East River in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. He was allegedly placed in, quote, protective custody, end quote, against his wishes. That's where Boyle says he finally got to meet his client. German wrote the frequent transfers were part of a notorious form of Department of Correction punishment known as, quote, around the world, end quote, or the, quote, world tour, end quote. Bowins, 37, is being held on assault charges from an April 13 incident in Manhattan. Not in the Bronx, not in Queens, not in Brooklyn, in Manhattan. All right. Bowins was not the only inmate who faced alleged retaliation for the hunger strike. Remember, this started because of a hunger strike. Other inmates who spoke to public advocate Jumaine Williams during his tour of the Davoren Center on January 13 had their cells aggressively searched afterward by correction officers, German wrote. One officer confiscated commissary food and underwear from a detainee who they said had, quote, too many undergarments, end quote, according to German's letter. Correction officials previously told the news the hunger strike ended shortly after it was first covered by the press. And I could keep reading this, but I'm not going to. The thing that really bothers me about this is, I think about how I ended up in jail all those times because I kept getting, quote unquote, ghosted by the women I dated. And then I'm hearing whispers online that somebody got a kid. I'm like, who has a kid? Is that why I got ghosted? I go to find out, and, unfortunately, the people whispering or doing the whispering also have a connection to my exes. Delaware is a very small state, right? And I end up in jail for violating a no contact order I didn't know I had until I got arrested. Now, I didn't have a lawyer. I had a public defender who wasn't really that helpful. If anything, he made things worse for me, right? But I had a public defender, right? Now, the thing about this case that's interesting to me is the fact that if this guy did not have a lawyer that was willing to stick with the entire process and probably stayed in contact with him before he did the hunger strike, right? If he didn't have a lawyer that actually did his due diligence as a lawyer, such as reporting inequities to the news, right? For example, no one would know about this. Not one person. And the sad part about it is, how many of you even read the paper to see shit like this going on? And the fucked up part about it is, I'm glad I spent the $3 on this paper, because that's just the first story. I'm not gonna sit here and read every single thing that I find fucked up in here, because there's a lot, right? All right, so on page 8, MTA chief: crime and vagrants scare riders away from transit. You're in New York City. If you don't learn how to deal with those people, so long as they're not fucking with you, you don't learn how to deal with those people, get the fuck out of New York City or don't take public transit. It's bad enough that shit is $2.75 and it's going up any fucking way. People can't even afford to go to work most of the time. All right. There's another one. Education watchdog fails to meet. School oversight panel needs members. All right. Quarantine time for students cut to 5 days. Okay. Schumer calls for $360 million to protect mosques, churches, and synagogues. I wonder why. Breyer, I'm out of here, gives Joe chance to name black woman to court. Okay. Bragg hires Blaz Flack and gun crime specialist. Okay. Long lost Holocaust survivor letter returned to city family. Auschwitz pledged group to fight indifference to hatred. Okay. What else they got in here? Because they had a lot of shit in here. Let me find one more. There was one more thing that was pressing. The crash revealed a glimpse of their suffering. They got mad comics in here too. Glad I spent money on this shit. You know, the next thing I saw that bothered me. Time for real fantasy heroes to come out. And I guess they're talking about fantasy football or whatever. I don't really watch football. I don't watch sports. I'd rather play a sport than sit and watch it with people. But hey, you know what I mean? That's what people do. I just like to remind people it's part of the bread and circuses thing. You got churches that offer bread, right? They won't offer you money, but they'll offer you bread. But they'll ask you for money. And then you got the circuses, which are, you know, the leagues, you know what I mean? And not to take anything away from, you know, some of the stuff that these guys do, right? Because some of these people are great people, right? But it's literally slavery. And I can't remember the name of that show where the guy was like a Spartan and he was enslaved. Now, I'm not talking about Gladiator, but they did like another show and the guy had gotten a heart attack and died or some shit. It was a white guy. My younger brother knows the show because he showed it to me. But basically, it amounted to that. You know what I mean? You got all these wealthy people who are enslaving people and making them fight, right? For the entertainment of other wealthy people, right? and they're all sitting there having a good time. And the last part I remember is this guy, he worked with the people that he was fighting against, all the people that were down there, all the slaves. And they went, hopped up on the balcony and started fucking everybody up as a group, right? The reason that first story bothered me so much is because of the reason they said they moved him. Now, the reason they said they moved this guy, hold on, because it was definitely quoted. They said something about him being too influential. That's why after this guy, what's his name? His name is Boyle is his lawyer. Ervin Bowins. And the hunger strike began January 7th at Robert and Davoren Center, right? And January 11th, news came out about the hunger strike, right, at the Davoren Center. And then they said he was told he was, another quote, too influential, end quote, and then end the other quotes. Said Chris Boyle, an attorney with Defenders Services who spoke with Bowins. And then on January 13th, he was moved to George R. Vierno Center, a completely different correctional facility. So this is what happens in jail, right? Let's not even talk about what happens out in the street. When you got people who are enabling sex trafficking, human trafficking, and all this other shit, and they do it under the auspice of being protected politically somehow. And what people don't realize is when they create laws, they don't create laws for the benefit of everybody. They create laws to protect themselves from you and me. And I know this is about 18 minutes in right now. I didn't mean to go on for this long, but I think it's very important that people start to get an awareness of how much this system is against them, and to stop thinking that this system is for them. This is why the guy, Fresco, whatever his name is, the guy that wanted to do the Venus Project, that's why he was just like, yo, this shit has to go. This shit has to change. Because the way this system is run, it's self-destructive by nature. It's not designed to sustain itself, right? The only way to sustain it is by having a permanent underclass of citizens that you can treat however the hell you want. Now, black folk, and in particular black men, are fodder for that system. This is why we had all the issues we had, after the civil rights movement and whatnot. They were looking to completely cut the head of the black family off. Because according to patriarchy, the male is the head of the household, right? So when they come out with all these welfare rules and laws, oh, you need money to take care of your kids? Well, this is the 70s. You need money to take care of your kids? All right, but you can't have a man in the house with you. That type of shit. And this shit has been going on since then. So when you look at how people act today when it comes to relationships, marriage, and so on and so forth, in the black community, look, when you just look at the projects, right? For example, when you make it so that you can't even do the simplest shit like go get a job, right? Because if everybody from the projects went and got a job, they probably wouldn't be living in the projects anymore, right? It's by design. So if you leave all these people desperate, right, in need of resources, right, and you starve them, not only of those resources, but of basic education and information, right? What else is there left to do but eat, sleep, fuck, sell drugs, or whatever the fuck it is you do there? Think about that. So, when it comes to black folk, the only time we seem to get along collectively is when we're having sex with one another, and the sex has to be good. If the sex isn't good, then it's not good, right? It's like, what was the point, right? The only time black men and black women get along is when they're able to have good sex with each other. So I'm watching how all of these people, it's bad enough, they, back in Jim Crow times, a lot of the propaganda they gave out was, oh, keep black men away from white women because they're aggressive by nature and they'll rape your women and they're so hypersexual, right? They don't mention black women because they won't talk about how these people hypersexualize black women in the first place, right? In order to control black men, they had to hold black women captive to some degree. So you have black men who were in love with some of these women. Back during slavery, people were jumping the broom to get married in secret as slaves. Now imagine you doing that, and you got to stand there and watch either a slave master, a slave catcher, some racist, dumbass white person, or some quote-unquote mandingo that they done gave a whole bunch of alcohol and extra privileges to. They can grab your woman, pull her into the shed, fuck the hell out of her while you're in earshot, while they got a shotgun pointed at your head, smiling. So when I talk about black history, right, the shit that, most white folk don't even want to talk about, black folk don't even want to talk about it because it's like, yo, you can't tell us our history, we still going through but the issue here is, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? If you're not willing to learn your history, you're probably going to repeat that shit, right? When you have somebody who's taking the time to actually educate you and they don't get anything from it, right? And they're going through their own shit. And I'm not saying this is necessarily me, but I'm not the only person that's going through this shit, right? And then you have these motherfuckers that refuse to listen. All they want to talk about is money, but they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing to get the money that they work hard. They claim to work hard for, right? And then what's worse is the money's not even backed by shit but debt. And I've been trying to work with these people to fix the money, because once we fix the money, we can fix a lot of different shit. We can make the money so that it's not even backed by debt. And it's not even that they got to change the Federal Reserve System right now, right? They can leave it as is. But we need an alternative currency just in case that currency fails. It irks me. It irks the hell out of me that people don't want to listen. And what bothers me the most is when I try to explain this stuff to people, how I feel, what I'm thinking, you know what I mean, whether I'm right or wrong in their eyes, that's irrelevant to me, right? I've done the research, I have the experience, I know what the fuck I'm talking about. Just because I don't have if I talk about medical stuff, right? Look, I've been a caretaker for most of my life, right? And the sad thing that people don't get when it comes to caretaking is who takes care of the caretakers, right? The people they take care of, they're taken care of, right? But imagine you being a caretaker to somebody who acts like you don't have feelings and you don't have needs yourself. Like people will work you into a grave, right? Fuck your whole body up because you doing shit for them, but won't want to help you push your wheelchair after you're fucked up from that. If anything needed to change, I would say with black folk, that's where it needs to start. Is how we treat one another, because respect is a minimum, but people act like respect is extra just for you to show respect to somebody. And you know they say an armed society is a polite society, but when you think about it, if everybody walked around with a gun on their hip, right, people would have to think twice about how they approach people, what they said to people, what they didn't say to people, how they treated other people, right? Because at any moment you could set somebody off who has a gun and they'll just pull out and start shooting. What I do, right? The way I carry myself is in such a way where if you're afraid of whether I have a weapon or not, just keep in your mind that yes, it's possible I may have a gun, it's possible I may not have one. What difference does that make? What do you want? And how are you treating me? A lot of y'all need to grow the fuck up. Seriously. Because you got these babies, and I call them babies, but let's say they're adolescents or teens, right? You can't treat these kids today like they're stupid kids that don't know shit. If anything, most of the people older than me need to be learning from the youth, because they're the ones that are going to end up taking care of us in the long run, right? If you make it so that those younger than us can't even do better than us, we're going to fail. We are going to fail. And this is the actual most opportune time for people my age. I'm 36, and people my age and older to stop with the teaching stuff so much, right? Stop micromanaging the youth. Stop trying to nanny the youth. Stop for a second. Because if you're going to teach something, you have to be just as willing to learn as you are to teach. And if you're always coming from a standpoint where it's like, I need to teach this lesson, what's going to end up happening is you're going to be forced to learn a lesson because you refuse to open your mind enough to the possibility that maybe you don't know shit and maybe you could stand to learn something from people younger than you. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying the youth know everything, right? They need guidance. They need people who have experience, who have been certain places before, right? But if it's always from a standpoint where it's because I'm older, right? This is really what it is. Because I'm older, you got to do what I said. And if you don't do what I said, you're going to have such and such a problem. That's bullying, right? I'm not a parent, right? I don't have children of my own, right? But if I had children, right, and I had my own kid or kids, and I was trying to raise my kids, I would never raise my kid in a way where it's like, you better do what I say, or else this is gonna happen to you. That I would never do that, because you might as well say, I'm gonna teach you a lesson. I hate when people do that shit. I'm gonna teach you a lesson. I'm gonna teach him a lesson. I hate that fucking shit. Because most of the time, that the people trying to teach the lesson don't even know what the fuck they're teaching. The way I would raise my child or children, if I had my own kids, is if they want to do something and I feel or think it's a bad idea, right? Feel like or think that it might be a bad idea, what I'll do is I'll sit down and talk to them. I don't care how much in a rush they are, right? I make sure they had the energy and the attentiveness to entertain a mature conversation in the first place. Because if they can't do that, then I might have to be like, well, you're not going anywhere till we talk about it. Right? And then what I would do is, okay, if you do this, right, please be aware that A could happen, B could happen, C could happen, D could happen. And it could affect us like such and such and such and such. Right? You don't necessarily lay out every option or every choice that they have, but you have to illuminate those options and choices for them. Because if you don't get in the habit of critical thinking as an adult, and especially as a parent, you're gonna raise kids that just do whatever feels good to them. And it's worse if you're a parent that's so judgmental and ignorant, right? That your kids can't even go to you to talk to you about serious shit. Because if they do, you flip out or you dismiss them or you're like whatever, right? A lot of you parents, you wonder why your kids hide shit from you, right? Whether they're getting abused, bullied, beat up, whether they got into a new relationship, whether they're sexually active or not. If you don't create the space for your child or children to safely come to you and express their feelings and what they might want to do without coming under judgment or without the threat of being punished for that, right? They're not going to come to you for shit except for the shit they absolutely need. And I'm not trying to sound like a know-it-all. I will be the first person to tell motherfuckers I do not know everything. There's a lot of shit that I don't know, right? But the issue comes in when people have their own objectives, right? That they don't let you in on, right? But you're asking why people are leaving you in a bad situation, and all they can say is, why do you have to be quote unquote right all the time? I could keep going on and on, but this is already damn near 33 minutes long, so I'm gonna cut it short here. But yeah, I'm not done with this conversation. Not by a long shot.